For 6 years, my husband believed I was terrible with money. He'd joke about my coupons, roll his eyes when I compared grocery prices, and remind everyone that I was trying to build a small bookkeeping business from home. According to him, I barely made enough to cover my own coffee. I never corrected him. Not because I couldn't. Because I wanted to know who he really was when he thought I had nothing to offer. Looking back, I think the marriage ended long before I found out he was cheating. The affair was just the final confirmation. My name is Evelyn, and if you'd met us back then, you probably would have thought my husband, Mason, was the successful one. He wore tailored suits, drove a company SUV, and loved talking about hard work to anyone who would listen. I was the quiet wife. The woman who packed lunches, remembered birthdays, paid bills on time, and supposedly struggled to keep her tiny business alive. That last part wasn't true. 3 mornings a week, instead of working from the spare bedroom like Mason believed, I drove 40 minutes to an office registered under my late mother's surname. It wasn't a bookkeeping business. It was a financial risk consulting firm. Not flashy. Not famous. But profitable enough that my yearly income quietly passed Mason's before our 3rd anniversary. The funny thing? I never planned to hide it. The first time I landed a 6-figure contract, I came home excited. I opened a bottle of wine. I told Mason we'd finally have room to breathe. He smiled for exactly 2 seconds. Then he asked one question. So, does that mean you'll be paying for everything now? He laughed after saying it. I didn't. The weeks that followed were worse. Every success I mentioned somehow became a joke. Must be nice pushing numbers around while the rest of us work. You got lucky. Anyone could do that. Eventually, I stopped telling him. Not because his words hurt. Because I realized something far more dangerous. He didn't want a successful wife. He wanted someone who would always need him. So I gave him exactly that version. At home, I complained about grocery prices. I wore the same winter coat for years. When he suggested vacations, I'd smile apologetically. Maybe next year. He never questioned it. People usually see what they expect to see. About 5 years into our marriage, another familiar face slowly became part of our routine. Lauren. She'd been one of my closest friends since college. She knew where we kept the spare key. She knew Mason's favorite coffee. She even knew the alarm code because she'd watched our house during vacations. At first, nothing felt unusual. Lauren would stop by after work. She'd stay for dinner once or twice a month. Sometimes she'd bring dessert. Sometimes she'd text Mason if she couldn't reach me. Normal things. Until they weren't. Little details began stacking on top of each other. She laughed a little harder at his stories than everyone else. Mason suddenly cared about how the house looked before she visited. He started wearing cologne on random Tuesday evenings. When I walked into the kitchen once, their conversation ended so quickly the silence felt louder than words. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it wasn't. I didn't accuse anyone. I've spent my entire career studying financial fraud. One lesson always stayed with me. Never act on suspicion. Wait for evidence. Then one rainy Wednesday, I came home almost 2 hours earlier than usual. The client meeting I'd driven across town for had been cancelled at the last minute. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Mason's car sat in the driveway. So did Lauren's. I remember standing there with my hand on the front door, convincing myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe they were planning my birthday. Maybe something had happened. Maybe. The moment I stepped inside, I heard laughter upstairs. Not loud. Comfortable. The kind of laughter shared between people who had forgotten anyone else existed. I walked halfway up the stairs before hearing Lauren say something that froze me where I stood. "She'll never know." Then Mason laughed. "She never notices anything." Neither of them knew I was already home. I could have walked upstairs. I could have demanded answers. Instead, I quietly backed down the stairs, picked up my car keys again, and drove away. Not because I was afraid. Because after years of helping companies uncover million-dollar fraud schemes, I knew one simple truth. People reveal far more when they think no one is watching. And for the first time in 6 years, I decided to stop being the wife everyone underestimated. I was about to become the woman who watched every move they made. And neither of them had the slightest idea what was coming next. I didn't confront them that day. I did something far more useful. I watched. For the next 3 weeks, I became invisible inside my own marriage. I smiled through dinner. I asked Mason about work. I thanked Lauren whenever she stopped by. Meanwhile, I started noticing patterns. Every Thursday afternoon, Mason suddenly had late meetings. Lauren always seemed to have errands on the same days. Their locations lined up almost perfectly. One Friday, I hired a licensed investigator. Not because I needed proof for myself. I already knew. I needed proof that couldn't be argued with. 5 days later, a plain envelope landed on my desk. Inside were photographs. Mason and Lauren holding hands outside a boutique hotel. Dinner dates. Weekend trips. A kiss in a parking garage. There it was. The truth. Strangely, I didn't cry. I felt relief. The worst part wasn't discovering they had betrayed me. It was realizing I'd spent years trying to earn loyalty from people who had already decided I wasn't worth giving it. That evening, I called my attorney. "How complicated do you want this?" she asked. I looked at the photos one last time. As simple as possible. The paperwork moved faster than Mason could have imagined. He thought we owned everything together. We didn't. 6 years earlier, when my consulting firm officially expanded, my attorney had insisted on keeping every business asset completely separate. At the time, Mason barely glanced at the paperwork. He trusted me to handle the boring financial stuff. Ironically, that decision protected everything. The office. The company. The investments. Every dollar I'd earned stayed exactly where it belonged. Mine. Then I made one final decision. I stopped quietly filling the holes in our finances. I canceled the automatic transfers that had covered our mortgage whenever Mason overspent. I stopped paying the credit cards he'd forgotten were linked to my account. I even removed myself from a private loan I'd guaranteed years earlier. I didn't sabotage him. I simply stopped rescuing him. There is a difference. The divorce papers arrived on a Monday morning. Mason called me before lunch. "What is this?" "A divorce." "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Come on, Evelyn. You can't afford to live on your own." I looked around my office. Floor-to-ceiling windows. 20 employees. A conference room carrying my family's name. You'd be surprised. He hung up. For the first time since we'd met. He underestimated me. Again. Lauren moved into the house 2 weeks later. Apparently, they believed everything had worked out perfectly. Friends later told me they celebrated with champagne. I hope they enjoyed it. Because exactly 18 days later, reality arrived. The mortgage payment bounced. Then another. Mason blamed the bank. After that came the credit card notices. The car loan. The overdue taxes. Every financial shortcut I'd quietly been fixing behind the scenes suddenly became impossible to ignore. His salary had never been enough to support the lifestyle he pretended was his. It never had been. I'd simply made the difference disappear every month. Without me, nothing balanced anymore. Then came the twist neither of them expected. Lauren accidentally met one of my clients. She introduced herself as Mason's partner. The client smiled politely. "Oh, you're with Evelyn's husband?" Lauren frowned. "Evelyn? The woman who owns Hawthorne Risk Consulting." Lauren laughed. "I think you've got the wrong person." "I don't." The client looked genuinely confused. "She's one of the best financial consultants I've ever worked with." That conversation changed everything. Lauren went home. She searched my company online. Read every interview. Every award. Every article. Then she found the public business filings. The woman she'd spent years quietly pitying owned a company worth millions. Mason called me that night. For the first time in our marriage. He sounded afraid. "Why didn't you tell me?" I stayed silent for a moment. Then I asked, "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. I'd tried. Years ago. He'd chosen to laugh instead. A week later. He came to my office. Not angry. Not confident. Just exhausted. "I made the biggest mistake of my life." "I know. I still love you." I looked at him carefully. "No." He blinked. "You love the version of me you just discovered." The receptionist quietly looked away. No one said a word. Mason lowered his head. For the first time. He had nothing left to argue with. Lauren left less than a month later. Not because she suddenly felt guilty. Because the future she'd imagined no longer existed. She hadn't stolen a successful man. She'd inherited unpaid bills, broken promises, and someone else's consequences. People sometimes ask if I planned all of this. The answer is no. I never wanted revenge. I wanted respect. The revenge happened the moment I stopped carrying people who never appreciated the weight. Today, my company has grown larger than I ever imagined. I finally bought the lake house I'd postponed for years. My employees feel more like family than my own marriage ever did. And every now and then, someone mentions Mason. Apparently he's doing better. I genuinely hope that's true. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean giving someone another chance. Sometimes, it simply means you're finally happy enough that their choices no longer have the power to hurt you. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. Never underestimate the quiet person in the room. Sometimes they're carrying everyone else. Until the day they decide not to anymore. If this story kept you hooked until the end, let me know in the comments. At what moment did you realize Mason had already lost everything? And if you enjoy stories about betrayal, karma, and unexpected comebacks, subscribe for more every week.